Then it says, I don't have a permission to live stream. Why is that? That's weird. Because I didn't log in from here today. That's weird. Anyway, we'll share our video later on after we're through. But yeah, we can continue because we are running late. Anyway, I just wanted to thank you guys for coming today. I appreciate you guys to this platform at Mommy's Corner. I'm your host, Suat, for this afternoon. And I am going to hand it over to the amazing doctors from Swedish to introduce themselves and to tell us today's topic. I am giving it to the floor first to Dr. Blake.
Great, thank you. So my name is Blake Henley. I'm a resident over at Swedish, and my particular area of interest is women and children. And I'm here with Dr. Gallagher, who I'll let introduce herself.
Muted. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I'm Amelia Gallagher. I'm also a resident at Swedish First Hill. And I'm also interested, especially in reproductive health, women, children, and pregnancy and parenting.
That's why we're here. Today we have an update on COVID. We did a very similar presentation over the summer when the Delta variant had just come out before the Omicron, and it turns out we have some more news, more data to share with you, but there is a lot of overlap with that presentation. And ultimately our goal is just to share what we can. I think with COVID, anything with COVID, the information is very overwhelming and there are so many different sources to get your information. The hope with this is that it's a concise summary of the high-level topics that we get asked about the most by our pregnant patients and those with children or hoping to have children. So I'll get started. So first we're going to talk about COVID itself and just give some updates, and then we'll go into vaccines and some information about vaccinations. So for the COVID updates, we'll talk about Omicron, the impacts of COVID in pregnancy, as well as when children get COVID. So the things we know now about the Omicron variant is that it definitely spreads more easily than other variants, which you likely know many people have gotten COVID lately, probably from Omicron. Vaccines still reduce the risk of contracting the variant, and vaccinated people have more mild symptoms with infection. And in particular, we know that the vaccines are protecting against disease and death, particularly. Yeah, the rest of this is pretty similar to things we've already talked about, but if you're fully vaccinated and become infected with the Omicron variant, you can still spread the virus to others. And this is all just answering some questions that we've gotten before. So what we're here to talk about a bit more is just what getting COVID in pregnancy looks like and what the implications are. So what we do know is that normally a pregnant person always has a lower immunity. That just has to do with sort of the havoc that's being wreaked on your body. And because of that, they also tend to get sicker when they get any sort of virus. That includes the flu, that includes a stomach bug, and in particular, COVID. They're more likely to go to a hospital to need a breathing machine or even die compared to their non-pregnant counterparts. And then there also are some impacts on the actual infant itself with a higher risk of preterm birth, so delivering before the 36-week mark, and stillbirth. And so even if you don't get very sick, there's a higher risk of complications. So, we've had pregnant patients that are like, I just had a cough for a couple of days. There's still a high risk that you could have issues with your blood pressure or other issues with the pregnancy. And then the worst outcomes get worse the farther along a pregnancy is. So 20 weeks or later, considered in that third trimester. Just some numbers for anyone who's a numbers person. Compared to their non-pregnant counterparts, pregnant people who get infected with COVID are 3 times more likely to need intensive care. That's things like the breathing machine we talked about, or very intense medications and a stay in the special very severe disease unit of the hospital. They're 2 to 3 times more likely to need advanced life support, which is very scary. And they have a small increased risk of dying due to COVID. And then we already talked about the risk of stillbirth and preterm birth. As for children, what we're finding about Omicron is that it has a higher infection rate for children than other variants. If you remember at the beginning when COVID was coming out 2 years ago, if you can believe it was that long ago, we didn't even know if kids could get infected by COVID because the numbers were so low. And now we're knowing that Omicron is the variant that has the highest likelihood of infecting kiddos. So it's 5 times more likely for children under the age of 4 to need hospital care, which is particularly a high area of concern. And we'll talk about it a little bit later, but kiddos 5 and under can't get the vaccine. So, and yet they are one of the most fragile in terms of all of the children's ages. So vaccinations are really to protect the younger children as well who can't get vaccinated. And they're 1.4 times more likely to need intensive care. So that's another reason why we're here to chat more about vaccines and answer some questions. So what we're going to talk about, we just have some quick facts. Would like to dispel some myths that are out there. We have a brief topic on racial disparities with the vaccine in particular, and then our recommendations for vaccines when you're pregnant, when you're breastfeeding, or when you're attempting to get pregnant. So some quick facts. This is a pretty wordy slide, so I'll just try to summarize it for you. Ultimately, at this point, we're recommending vaccination for all people 5 years or older. That 5-year mark was reached a couple of months ago, if you've heard about it. So there's a big slew of kiddos from 5 to 12 who are able to get their vaccine. I anticipate in the next few weeks, I think they're taking it to the House to approve to age 2 years old and up. So that should be coming soon, hopefully. The great thing is that now that it's been 2 years, we have a lot more data that's really useful for not only reassuring our patients, but also reassuring us that these are really safe recommendations. And we're getting a lot more data about pregnancy, which again is wonderful. Pregnancy is always a population of people who are so careful with what we recommend. And we'll go in a little bit more to the data. There's currently no evidence that any vaccines cause fertility problems. Again, we're going to talk about that later. And because pregnant people have such a high risk of getting severely ill compared to non-pregnant people, we are particularly interested in encouraging vaccination for pregnant women. So the first thing that we say loud to patients over and over and over again, that the COVID vaccine is not a live vaccine. There have been a couple of live vaccines with flu and things like that in years past, which I think is where that myth first comes from. And that's a little piece of a virus that is alive. But the COVID vaccine, all of them, the Moderna, the Pfizer, the J&J, no one is using a live vaccine. So there's nothing alive. So the way that I like to think and describe it to patients, what they're doing in the lab is they're chopping up the virus into little pieces, and think of like a bug or a worm or a snake, whatever, and cut it up into little pieces. It's not going to survive with that little piece. And then they're just copying that little piece, and that's what they're producing. And that's what all this mRNA is talking about. So mRNA has been a hot topic since the vaccine started to be made. And basically all they are is an identifier of the virus that they introduce to a human immune system to then build a response. It's kind of like showing the other team's jersey color to your immune system to say, if you see this, I need you to get into some action. So because it's not alive, again, it's a little chopped up piece of this little bug, you cannot get COVID from getting the vaccine. And similarly, you can't give COVID to someone from getting the vaccine. There's nothing in the actual injection that has any sort of ability to get anyone sick. And the side effects that people have that sometimes think is them getting COVID is actually their immune response building a defense mechanism to COVID. And one thing that has been of a particular interest, particularly in our line of work, has been how, as you know, all this data comes out, what we're looking at in terms of racial health disparities. And we already know that there are racial health disparities with all vaccines. And part of that has to do with everything listed here. So income, education, and wealth gaps, job access, racism and discrimination, healthcare access, transportation. lack of trust as a result of blatant post-medical racism and experimentation, especially with something like the COVID vaccine, which felt really new. There was a lot of concern that it was a similar experimentation on different minority groups. And so because of that, they, like certain racial and ethnic groups, were more or less likely to get the vaccine, and so were more likely to get severely ill from COVID. So we kept seeing that disparity. And this is a slide, this is some data from last summer, and we presented this in our summer presentation. Of what you could see is that Hispanic and Black populations were significantly less likely to have gotten any of the vaccine. I will say what we're very happy to report is that the most recent, and this is, you can't see it, but down at the bottom it says like January 21 to January 2022. So this isn't a year. You see the rise of vaccinations. So it's the same website, it's the same group of researchers who have been doing these studies. They changed up their format from the last bit of data, but what you can see is that the population of Black vaccinated, Hispanic vaccinated, and white vaccinated are actually pretty similar. And you can see that spike at the beginning, and I think a lot of that has to do with mistrust and lack of access, but we're starting to reach that equity, I would say. But then if you look down at the bottom, those are people who definitely won't get it, who are surveyed. And the population is actually higher in white people, and there is a strong affiliation with Republican political party. So unfortunately, that has to do with some of the vaccine that's been politicized. But this is just a little bit of hope for the racial disparities we'd seen at the beginning that were causing a very increased incidence of COVID in those minority groups. And I'm hopeful that maybe we're leaving that behind, at least for this virus. And now we're going to talk about our medical recommendations for vaccines, and I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Gallagher.
Thanks, Blake. And so with a lot of that information, our recommendations are the same as almost all the experts in medical experts. And I wanted to touch on some specifics that are of interest to this group. Is that in the obstetric and gynecologic experts, the experts in pregnancy, recommend especially that pregnant, breastfeeding, and folks who are looking to get pregnant get vaccinated. And there's also a recommendation that from these groups that especially folks who are pregnant or recently pregnant definitely get the booster shot. And that is really helpful, especially as Blake was talking about in pregnancy. Your immune system is already depressed and you're already more at risk of getting any infection. And so getting that extra protection from a booster shot is really, really helpful. And then as we're talking more about Omicron being a higher risk for kids getting infected, experts in pediatric medicine recommend vaccinating kids over 5. And so to break it down a little bit more, talking about getting vaccinated while pregnant, some more information on that. 99% of pregnant patients who needed to get hospital care because they had COVID were unvaccinated. So almost all of the pregnant patients who had to get hospital care, meaning that they were quite sick from COVID, it correlates to them not having a vaccine. I also wanted to reassure anybody that some small studies have shown that there's no relationship with getting vaccinated while pregnant and having a miscarriage. So it is safe in that regard of getting vaccinated while pregnant. And there's a little bit more data on that, looking at almost 3,000 pregnant patients getting the vaccine, that the rate of miscarriage is actually the same as the rate in the general population of not getting the vaccine. So there's no increased risk there, which is really reassuring. And that if you get COVID infection around 20 weeks or later, there's actually a lot higher risk of getting bad pregnancy outcomes or birth outcomes. And so the recommendation is even more strong about getting vaccinated if you're not already when you're pregnant early to prevent any sort of increased risk of getting sick from COVID later or mid-pregnancy to late pregnancy. And a lot of this is looking at, I think sometimes people think about getting vaccinated versus not getting vaccinated. And a lot of this information is showing that it's just as safe to get vaccinated as getting the vaccine doesn't increase any risk. But we also want to think about comparing people who get vaccinated with people who get sick from COVID. And because you're such a high risk of getting infected with COVID when you're pregnant, or if you're a baby or if you're a kid, that we want to compare people who are getting vaccinated with people who are getting infected with COVID and getting sick with COVID. So it's safe when you're pregnant to get vaccinated, and it is much more dangerous to get COVID when you're pregnant. So we can go to the next slide. And so how does the vaccine affect pregnant people? Blake talked about what an mRNA vaccine is, and the evidence has shown that it is safe for pregnant people and people trying to conceive. It has been shown that there are some side effects of getting either a local injection site reaction, of having a sore arm or swelling there. That you might, if you're pregnant when you're getting vaccinated, you might get more of that, and you also might get more general symptoms like muscle aches, fevers, and chills that, again, Blake was saying, is more a reflection of your immune response to the vaccine and not you getting sick from COVID. And there is a patient registry looking at folks getting the vaccine, and that is where we get some of this data from, because there have been so many people who've gotten vaccinated. We can look back at whether they're at higher or lower risk of any complications. And there is not an increased risk of miscarriage, as I was talking about before. And then we also wanted to include breastfeeding and lactation. So there has been some small studies since we last talked to y'all about COVID in pregnancy that show that during breastfeeding, there isn't any dangerous side effects from getting vaccinated while you're breastfeeding, that only a very small number of people had a little temporary reduction in milk supply that then came back after transiently. That really exciting is that the antibodies that your bodies produce, so your immune system, your immune response to the vaccine, is in your breast milk, and that can get passed on to your baby and provide protection for your babies that are too young to get the vaccine themselves. And that another reassurance that no part of the vaccine, any ingredients or any components of the virus, is passed onto the breast milk. So there's no way of putting any of the vaccine into the breast milk that will then get to your baby. So only the benefits of your immune response that your body is making going on to protect your baby that you're breastfeeding, and none of the vaccine components at all. And here's a little more information of how the vaccine affects trying to get pregnant and fertility. And they actually did a small study looking at 3 different groups: people who had had COVID in the past and now had what we call a natural immunity from having the infection in the past, people who had gotten vaccinated, or people who hadn't gotten vaccinated nor had they gotten infected. And it showed, and this was a fertility study looking at in vitro fertilization, and where they're able to actually look more closely at the success of pregnancy and the success of eggs getting fertilized. And there's the same rate of pregnancy success throughout all of those groups. So there's really no effect on trying to be fertile or trying to get pregnant with getting vaccinated, which is great. And so, as Blake was saying, a little more detail on the COVID vaccine and children, that the CDC is recommending that kids that are 5 years old and older are eligible and should receive the vaccine. And luckily, there's hopefully going to be even younger kids able to get the vaccine and be protected from getting sick or getting any complications from getting COVID soon in the future. And those kids who are under 5 or who are 4 or under, who are at risk of getting sick, they can still be protected by family members, parents, especially breastfeeding parents, getting vaccinated. That can help either provide them with a safe environment that's COVID-free, or from actually passing along that immunity through breast milk. And what's really nice is that vaccinated folks are not only less likely to get COVID themselves, but they're also less likely to transmit it to a baby that's unvaccinated. And so we'll go back to some vaccine side effects. We talked a little bit about how when you get the shot, you can have some soreness in the muscle of your arm, some redness and swelling that usually just lasts a few days. And then it's also can be common, especially after the second or even third dose of the vaccine, that you'll have any kind of variety of symptoms that are generalized and can affect your whole body, including being tired, having a headache, having muscle pain, chills, fever, nausea. Those who, the studies have shown that pregnant patients sometimes have worse just local symptoms in their arm rather than their whole body. But after the second dose, nausea is a really common side effect for pregnant patients to have, and that passes in time. But that's also something that if you're getting vaccinated, to look out for, that these symptoms are signs of your immune system responding, not signs of you getting sick, and that the nausea could be from the vaccine and it will pass as well. I also just wanted to make a caveat that if you were exposed to COVID before you're vaccinated, sometimes it is possible to get sick with COVID at the same time you're getting the shot. And so it can be helpful if you are feeling sick and you have a cough or you have a fever that, and you're worried that it might be COVID. It's not from the shot. It's from possibly an exposure before you were protected from the vaccine. And so that would be a point to talk to your doctor and get tested. But the lucky thing is that you're still protected with the vaccine for any future infections.
And Amelia, I just want to add one thing. The vaccine does not cause a cough.
Right.
So, which is exactly what you said. So if you have a cough after a vaccination, that'd be a good time to get tested, because that would not be from the vaccine itself. That's from the virus.
And so these are some tips for after the vaccine to just help you feel a little bit better. It can always be hard when there's some expected side effects from something that you're taking, that you're kind of signing yourself up to possibly feel crummy for a few days. And I think we just want to emphasize that there are so many good reasons to get vaccinated, because feeling crummy from the virus and getting sick from it is going to be a lot longer, can possibly result in hospitalization, can possibly result in really complicated complications for your baby, for if you're pregnant, all of the things we were talking about before. And from the vaccine, it's usually only a handful of days, but it is hard to kind of sign up for that and make time to rest, and maybe have a lighter schedule for a few days when you're busy or have kids. So things that you can do is you can ice or put a cool cloth on the local place where the vaccine was placed. Moving your arm, exercising it can get any inflammation or swelling to reduce. And then make sure that you're getting plenty of sleep and drinking plenty of fluids for those few days to kind of prevent any sort of generalized symptoms. And so in summary, what we're talking about, pregnant people with COVID, getting infected with COVID, are much more at risk of getting seriously ill and having complications from the virus, both for themselves and for their pregnancy and their babies. People who then get vaccinated do not get as sick and can prevent having any of those complications. And all these letters are all those experts that I was talking about. The CDC, as you know, ACOG is the Society of OBGYN experts. SMFM are also kind of high-risk pregnancy experts, and they all recommend that people who are pregnant, lactating, or trying to conceive get the vaccine and a booster shot, and that the vaccines that they recommend are the Pfizer and the Moderna shot. And those are also, the Pfizer is also the shot that is available for kids who are 5 and older as well. So we have some resources here, but I think mostly we wanted to open it up for questions and on this talk, and then also any requests for our talk next month.
Thank you, doctor, so much, as always. Ladies, any questions before I open the floor? I'm going to answer this phone. Any questions? So nobody has any questions. So this whole entire lecture. Oh, wow, that's amazing. Okay, I have a few questions. So you said that now vaccines are being allowed for 2 to 0. Is that what it is? Or 0 to 2?
Not yet.
Oh,
Right now, it's only 5 and up.
5 and up still?
We're hoping for 2 and up soon.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that would be great because I can't wait. I want it to be the youngsters too, because they go to daycare. Sometimes moms has to work. So we need for them to hurry up. What does it look like, because we talked about, how vaccine rate is so low for the Hispanic and Blacks. Is it getting better than what it was before, or it's still the same?
Yeah, so now it has equalized to, at least between the study we were looking at, referenced Hispanics, Black, and people identify as white. And now everyone is in like the 72 to 74th% vaccinated, or at least have received one round of the vaccine. So now it's there, but the initial rise within the first year, there were a lot of those disparities.
Is it this study, is it only Washington State or the whole entire US?
It's the United States.
Oh, that's really good. It's
a really cool website, and it does live vaccine kind of studies and multiple different categories that you can filter by to check in on disparities based on race, socioeconomic status, age, political party. It's a really, really cool resource.
That's good. That's good. I think a lot of things has changed, because we pushed this, schools doing it, even churches, mosques, and synagogues are doing. I think that's what made it differences. That's great. How about the rate of women in pregnancy, women in pregnancies? Because I still have a client there who are still insisting, thinking that they don't want to get vaccinated while they're pregnant. How's that looking?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of similar to the other data we looked at. It's increased since we last presented. Part of that is as we have more data, physicians are making a lot of stronger recommendations. At the very beginning, no one was really sure if we should be offering this to our pregnant patients, but now that we have all that data, it's a much stronger recommendation. Yeah. I think Amelia is double checking the actual percentage right now. But initially it was pretty low. It was less than 50%. And then as we got more data, it's slowly been climbing up. Oh, okay. At this point though, we recommend it 100% of our patients. So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, there's a recent study actually looking at the percentage, looking at vaccination in pregnant patients. And they are looking at October 2021. And those who gave birth in October of 2021, 32% of women giving birth had 2 doses of the vaccine compared to 77% in all women. This was a study that was done though in the UK, so not in the US.
Oh, not in the US, huh? How is US looking for overall and then us? UK versus us when it comes to vaccine overall? Who's doing like a better? I want to know what the competition is doing.
That's a good question. Our national average is 70%. So let me see what the UK is.
I do have a question about
Go ahead.
the COVID vaccine as it relates to pregnancy or getting pregnant. A couple of my clients expressed that they think it stops people from getting pregnant.
Again,
Yeah, and that's why they're not
feeling comfortable.
they're hesitant to get the vaccine. So I know there's no truth to it, or I don't know if there's any studies done about that.
Yeah, there actually was a study done looking at comparing patients who got vaccinated compared to those that weren't vaccinated, and the pregnancy rates are the same.
Yes.
So it doesn't affect ability to get pregnant. And it also doesn't have an increased rate of miscarriages. So there might, if there's a concern, if you guys are hearing a concern of your clients worried about pregnancy loss, there's not an increase of risk of pregnancy loss with the vaccine either.
Makes sense.
And I have some data updates to give. So the UK is doing better. Scotland has 93% vaccinated. England and Wales have 92%. Ireland 89%. And then as for pregnant, as of January of 2022, 40% of pregnant people had either been vaccinated or had gotten vaccinated during pregnancy. And that's staggeringly improved from the year prior, which was March of 2021, when it was 3%. Part of that was vaccination availability, as well as, like I said, our recommendations weren't nearly as strong as they are now.
Wow. Well, we got work to do.
Big time.
Oh my goodness. Whew, I wonder why they're different from us. I mean, I don't know.
If you look on the website, there's a lot on the website that documents everything, and it's young people who identify as Republican have the lowest percent of vaccination rates at this time.
Of ours, right?
Of ours, yeah.
In the US, yeah.
I know that.
In the United States. Younger people in general have lower vaccination rates as well, and a part of that we think has to do with the few lower consequences with an infection, or at least perceived consequences.
I had another important question, but it's in my head. Oh, next session. I was thinking more like what to expect when mom shows up at the hospital.
Oh, and I would love that.
Yeah. We could talk about that, and we could include like induction of labor, like what you'd expect with induction, and what you'd expect.
That's included all.
What you'd expect if you were like in labor, what you'd expect, like common things people when you're pregnant, why you would go to the hospital.
Yes, all of that included.
Yeah, that would be great.
I like that.
Yes. So what do we call it?
Going to the hospital.
Going to the hospital.
Pregnant and going to the hospital.
Pregnant and going to the hospital.
Going to the hospital. Going to the hospital.
I would say probably when you're in your third trimester.
We'll have to limit it to third trimester, just because
third trimester, or like
at the end of your third trimester, going to the hospital.
Yeah,
and that's the most common time to go to.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to cover a lot of questions that way.
At the end of 3rd trimester.
And then another topic I was wondering if people might be interested in that we could do in the future at some point would be like the postpartum period. So, after you have your baby, then, what our recommendations are, what some concerns could be, things like that.
That's after that, because postpartum, that's my favorite.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. You got great. Ladies, do you have any other requests besides us just talking? Hello. Let me see who's here. Bint is here. Taylor is here.
Yeah, I'm here.
What? Do you
Hi.
guys have any topic that the doctors wanted to cover? Hello. We have a
I
midwife,
think
by the way,
I
in the room. One of our midwife. Her name is Binta. Binta.
Oh,
Yeah.
hi. Yeah, so this is great. And then one of the questions that I actually had, you just answered right about the preconception, conceiving and COVID vaccination, because a lot of people are worried that is gonna affect them. So that's good. I'm really looking forward to the next session. Actually, it'll be good to know, because people are coming back and saying that once they get admitted to the hospital, they get a surprise COVID testing and without symptoms sometimes. And once that comes positive, then which they did not expect to happen, so they end up being, separated from the baby, and the trauma, birth trauma, where to follow after that. So maybe if we can talk a little about that and how we can warn people, or prepare them better for what to expect when they go to the hospital.
Yeah, we'll definitely include that question too, the COVID testing and the separation. I would definitely want to hear more about that, because my understanding is that it's not really recommended to separate the baby from the mother, even if the mother has COVID. But maybe we can talk more about what those circumstances could be in the case of like severe illness or babies in the NICU or something.
Yeah, and to answer the question about testing, because I actually just got off of the labor and delivery floor, testing has been a hospital protocol thing at different phases of the pandemic. We've tested all patients who come in, we've tested no patients, only patients who have symptoms, things like that. So it actually changes week by week. I can tell you right now, Swedish is not testing everybody who comes in, and only those who have any potential symptoms. But I can only speak to Swedish, and I can only speak to right now. But it has the kind of surprise COVID tests have happened where, when the surges were particularly high, we would test everyone, but we're not doing that at this moment in time.
Yeah, I know that too. Yeah, I've seen it. In Swedish, they're not doing that most of the time when I go there.
Yeah, they do it for any planned surgery.
Yes.
Across the board, not just with pregnancy. So they will test for that, but that would have happened regardless of where we're at within the pandemic.
Or I think inductions too. So if you have a
We haven't been testing for inductions. Yeah. Okay. That was new when I came on this month. They stopped testing for inductions.
Oh, it makes sense.
Thank you.
That was a good question. Any more question? Any last one? Burning question, ladies, before I let these doctors go? All right, that wraps up our evening. And thank you so much once again for coming up and spending the evening with us. I will send you an email, and I think we're set for next month. Even though it's Ramadan, something might change. I don't know yet, but I'll email you.
Yes, let us know if things have to change for that. If that would be a time better spent, or if you'd want to kind of postpone that.
The timing might change because 5 is close to breaking the fast time.
Yes.
But other than that, I think we're okay.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you so much, guys.
So much.
Appreciate it. You all enjoy your evening. What's left?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.